Well, hello again, friends. And we are very grateful to have you with us as we begin a new Masterworks season with the Quad Cities Symphony Orchestra. We're so grateful that you joined us in the previous season and excited to have you with us today, especially considering who we get to speak with today, not just music director of the Quad Cities Symphony Orchestra and its conductor, Mark Russell Smith, but our featured soloist, certainly no stranger to the Quad Cities, Garrick Ohlsson. Thank you for once again joining us. We're very grateful to have you with us.
It's my pleasure to be here, Kai and Mark Russell. Wonderful to be with you.
Likewise.
And it's a very special treat that when you are here with us physically, we get to hear Samuel Barber's Piano Concerto, Opus 38. And I was trying to rack my brains for your past visits with us, but I don't think we've ever had the Barber with you. Tell us a little bit about your relationship with this piece.
Well, I'm sure you haven't had the Barber with me. I don't know if John Browning ever played it with you in the distant past, did he?
He did. I think he did, like right early on in the piece's existence. I think he took it all over, and one of the places I'm pretty sure was the Quad Cities.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised. He once told John Browning, who premiered the piece in 1962, I believe, at what was then called Philharmonic Hall in New York. He told me in the 90s, when I met him for the first time, the great pianist John Browning, I said, John, nice to meet you, the usual words. And then I said, I feel a little sheepish. I've learned your piece. And he said, oh my gosh, please take it. I've played it more than 700 times. He said, I want to play Brahms and Beethoven. So there we are. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is totally associated with him for sure.
Yeah.
But I was trying to remember. I'm pretty sure the first time I heard it was when you played it in Phoenix, I think, if I'm remembering correct. I was assistant of the Phoenix Symphony.
I did.
Right. And I had never experienced it live before. And then I became music director of the Springfield Symphony in Massachusetts.
And we played it there.
And then we did it. I mean, that's what I recall. And I haven't done it since then. I just got my score out, and it's like markings from 1985 or whenever that was, like a long time ago.
They'll probably still work just fine.
Yeah.
Don't worry about the finale too much. The timpanist is on the beat.
Right.
We'll tell you about the finale in a few minutes.
And I'm anxious to hear about that, but I'm also very intrigued about what is it about a work of music, especially this one in particular, that invites a sustained relationship that makes you want to come back to it as a performer, as an artist?
Well, that's a very good and very serious question. I could go on very seriously about musical qualities, but I'm not going to. I think when a piece is such a raging success with the public, and causes the whole public to jump to its feet and scream bravo, it makes them feel good about the performers too. So it makes you look good. Now that's a little flippant, but no, it's a wonderful work. There is so much great music in the world for pianists to play, and it's frustrating because you can't ever get to it all. And you want to come back to things again and again. No, I think this is the great American piano concerto so far. Very seriously, it's there hasn't been an agreed upon great American novel, but there's been a few. But this is by far, I think, the great American piano concerto. The Gershwin in F notwithstanding, which is a great work. But this is a great symphonic, shall we say, more mainstream attempt, and it's much more than an attempt. It's wildly successful. In the 60s, Barber was beginning to be considered an old-fashioned composer because he didn't subscribe to any of the isms of the time, especially the dodecaphonic school or aleatoric school or the electronic music school. And in those days, times do change in 60 years. The compositional establishment wasn't exactly controlled by the proponents of those things, but nevertheless, one's status sort of seemed less serious if you wrote a piece that people liked that actually had beautiful melodies in it. Because how can I say this sort of the Darmstadt school of composition, which dominated in Europe, was sort of if the audience liked it, it can't be good, it can't be serious. It's the old puritanical versions of things, which has been going on for a long time. Tchaikovsky and Chopin suffered from the same thing in the 19th century. Anything that sounds that beautiful and pleasant to the ear can't possibly be nourishing. It has to be just pure sugar. Well, that's not true either. But the Puritan streak endless in the last 10,000 years or so of human history when we've had art in a civilized way. So Barber was wildly popular, actually, and his opera at Vanessa had been done, at the Met and many other places. He actually wrote the opening opera for the Metropolitan Opera to opening, and I think that was 1966, but that's after this concerto. But although he was very popular and much played, he was beginning to be a little bit old-fashioned, the way that Rachmaninoff had become, because when a composer is loved and very melodious and successful, a lot of the fans want him to do the same thing again. Rachmaninoff never wrote the second or third concertos again, or the second symphony. They're kind of a species of great thing, but he moved on where his fans didn't quite. Stravinsky was always way ahead of his fans, quite on purpose. They wanted the Rite of Spring again, and he couldn't have cared less 10 years later, much less 40 years later. The creators do move on, so they don't think of us, and we catch up with him or not. But Barber was beginning to seem a little not current, and he certainly didn't have the famous Stravinsky at the time, or a number of people, or the high regard of certain critics. And nevertheless, when Lincoln Center was open in New York in 1962, a number of great American orchestras each visited, and each gave a premiere of a piece. And I believe this was the Boston Symphony with Eric Leinsdorf conducting and John Browning playing. And it was by far the hit of the opening week, because after all, the public at a celebratory opening wants to embrace the new music, but they really want to hear Beethoven and Tchaikovsky, let's face it. I mean, even I do sometimes. So, to have a sensationally successful modern piano concerto was a great thing. Now, what I mean by modern at that time was not the most progressive, but not the most regressive either. I would say you could, if you've never heard this piece, you could think of it sort of as a Rachmaninoff / Prokofiev, brilliant Russian style piano concerto, updated a little bit and more American sounding and more sort of film noir, if you will, sounding in spots. And Mark Russell, I'm not giving you any chance to talk about this, but I'm just gabbing away.
No, please.
The first movement, I think Barber was trying to show how modernist he was becoming, because although the first movement is not dodecaphonic or does not subscribe to a 12-tone theory of composition, there are many tonal row things and many contrapuntal challenges. There's a lot of what you might call harsh, too angry or furious modern music in the first movement. It's definitely a punch, but of course Beethoven did that and Tchaikovsky did that later too in their older idioms. That's an emotional expression. The piece begins with a big piano cadenza, which outlines some of the major materials of the piece. Then the orchestra takes over and the piano comes in and a second theme is elaborated. And then the piano calms down, and then there's a very odd long tutti where the orchestra plays all the material of the movement, and the oboe sings an incredibly beautiful long aria, and which the strings then pick up and do in the best Rachmaninoff Puccini passionate fashion, and this is not exactly easy listening, but there's a real tune. Barber was a great melody master, and which is not so common in any age. So after that, there's a lot of back and forth between the piano and orchestra, a lot of drama. It gets to an incredible climax. And then there's this big noisy piano cadenza, which is very thrilling. And then the orchestra sort of comes in, smashes in at the end of it. Anyway, that's sort of some of what goes on in the first movement.
Right, and all this fits in the mold. I mean, certainly, historically, if that's a word, of a Rachmaninoff. And as I was revisiting the score just recently today, it looks, the piano writing, and this is a question I have for you actually. It looks similar in a way. As far as just the knuckle bustingness and just the hands full of notes, and like it looks very Rachmaninoff-like. Just on the page, and so I presume it's just fiendishly difficult to play.
It is quite difficult, but on the other hand, most of the pieces or most of your soloists play are pretty fiendishly difficult.
Right.
That's why you get hopefully really good people to do them, because they're not They're not stuff that just anybody can play.
Right, right.
Mildly. Yes, it's very difficult. It's as challenging as a Rachmaninoff or Prokofiev or Tchaikovsky concerto, in that virtuosic, heroic mold, and also in terms of the gestural writing, the orchestra with piano, but also sometimes versus piano.
Right,
The
right.
piano is an incredibly powerful, not only partner, but it's not the word enemy, but opposite number.
Protagonist, antagonist, yeah,
That's
right,
the word I'm looking for.
Well, and actually something you said earlier was really important to me, because I agree that it is like the American piano concerto. But that being said, it's still underrepresented. I mean, it's not played that often. And a big reason why we're doing it is because, you know, I feel like my job as music director of the Quad Cities is to say, I want to introduce you to a piece. I mean, yes, we heard it, you know, in 1965 or whenever we heard it, but it's been a long time. And this is a piece that you should know and that I know you're going to love. And you know Garrick Ohlsson, and you know me, and you trust us. And so we are advocates of this piece because it's a great piece. And there are so many underrepresented great pieces like that. And for me, this is right at the top of my list.
Exactly right. And you and I know, as who offer music to the public, that we do have a duty to new music to a certain extent, but whether that piece can then stand on its own and succeed is not up to us. We give it a chance, but a piece like this, which is now currently, I'll say currently, underrepresented on the stages of the concert world. As I said, it's always had a terrific success when I've played it. It was a sensational success when John Browning played it. I first heard it in 1966 with the New York Philharmonic, John Browning and Bernstein, and it just tore the roof off the place.
Of course, right? Wow.
As an 18-year-old talented young pianist, I said, this is the way to go. It's thrilling and so exciting. And it's really good because there's also, when we revive or bring to the attention a piece, again, people often think you might have an agenda. You know, you might say, well, you're trying to do an American program, so ho hum, we have to have an American piano concerto. No, this is really great, and I've played it in other countries, and its Americanness is only wonderful. It's not anything. I mean, I had the same experience recently recording with the Takacs Quartet, the Amy Beach Piano Quintet, which is a wonderful, wonderful piece by a very underrated Boston woman composer. And we were asked in many interviews, well, did you do this because it was a piece by a woman? And we said, no, we did it because it's great. I mean, we're not giving out charity here. This is really great music. And the fact that she lived in an era when women composers were not taken seriously is really neither here nor there. And there's plenty of other pieces by Amy Beach, which, while fine, I wouldn't want to record. But this is a masterpiece. And in the case of Barber, he wrote many masterpieces. Back to your comment about Rachmaninoff, of course, he probably knew Rachmaninoff, but he certainly knew Vladimir Horowitz, who premiered the Barber Piano Sonata in 1945. And so he knew one of the greatest pianists of the time. So he knew all about great virtuoso writing for piano and what was possible and what not. But if I may now push the ball forward, maybe the prize of the piece is the very short lyrical second movement.
Oh yeah.
Which makes people swoon. I mean, that's the tune that sometimes people actually can sing after hearing it once, which is based on a flute piece he wrote earlier and just only slightly elaborated. It's sad, it's lamentative, it's kind of wintry, without being frigid, just sort of the beautifulness of cold, bleak winter as opposed to the horror of it. So it's simply gorgeous. It's the thing that catches everybody the first time about this piece.
Right.
Well, I'm very grateful to have you walk us through the piece, but I'd like to come back. You said something earlier, and I know we don't want to belabor the point of the Americanness, but I find a phenomenon in listening to some of Barber's works is that I feel it's a unique sensation. And especially for me, Knoxville, summer of 1915, nothing else makes me feel that way. And you made the connection how that weaves into other cultural artifacts like film noir. Is that what creates a sound that we say, hey, wait a minute, I love Rachmaninoff, I love Beethoven, I love Mendelssohn, but that's mine. This one's mine.
That's a good question, which has been discussed a lot, and there's no easy answer to it. but I think the sense that it's mine, yeah, that we don't, for example, hopefully when an American musician plays Gershwin, we know how that goes,
Right.
you know. Similarly, but you could also say, and this has nothing to do with nationality, that when we who were raised in the 20th century play Stravinsky, we know how that goes too. That's our time. That's ours too. Whereas when we're going back to, you know, Bach and Handel, well, actually nobody was around then. but anyway, that gets too far afield. I think you're right. I think it's the film noir. I think it's the fact that a lot of Hollywood music, not film noir, those gorgeous film scores by all those European emigres, mostly Jewish refugees, who came looking to be serious composers, but the jobs they could find were in Hollywood, you know, who adopted a lot of the techniques of what I call the delicious three, Rachmaninoff, Strauss, and Puccini, in their music. And you can see what I mean. They all have a kind of, there's some similarities in their luscious gorgeousness and tunes and manner. That is part of the Hollywood sound. And Barber reflects the Hollywood sound somewhat in this piece, not so much, but it's, you know, it's not unknown to him or to us. So I think there are many elements that make it feel like ours. Now, of course, I'm a lot older than many people who were born, let's say, well, way after me. I was alive when this was brand new, you know. So it may not sound so brand new to anybody else, but it sounded like one of the things that was happening in music in my time as I got to learn about it and got to know it. Yeah, absolutely. And it definitely feels American-y, whatever that means.
Right, and part of that, I mean, like, you know, we're ending the season with Barber Symphony, the first symphony of the 20-minute work. Yeah, exactly. Which has, you know, that incredible lyricism, but also just that edgy drive and the rhythmic, the complexity of the rhythm, which, as I mean, the last movement of the concerto, you know, OMG, you know, it's like, you know, so it has that just like brash American, like ass kicking, can I say that? You know, rhythmic drive that also is, I think, is American, you know, and so people relate to that too, and that's just thrilling as heck, you know.
Very, and of course, and it happened at a time when America, you know, was the economic champion of the world and helping out Europe, and you know, Europe got destroyed. Asia, a lot of Asia was destroyed. We were the most modern country in the world. We were the most successful. We helped everybody. I mean, America just kicked everybody's, you know what.
Right.
Those days, the brash American confidence was amazing. Actually, it had always been an amazing characteristic of us. Yeah. And I think it has that brashness. And even, of course, it's so paradoxical, you know, how as we speak about music in general, you know, how is it the sound that we call Americana was basically invented by two Jewish composers from Brooklyn.
Right,
you know?
Right, exactly, right.
Well, it just shows you that we are not, you know, as any number of people have pointed out, you know, everybody, to quote Whitman, contains multitudes and can speak for multitudes. And, you know, Copland especially,
right.
you know, channeled all kinds of things which were American.
Right.
How? I don't know. He could. He had the gift. He had that inside him. It doesn't matter where you're from. You know, people say, how can I play Chopin so well? You're not Polish. Well, gosh, you know, if all I could play was American music, that'd be all right. But imagine if you're a brilliant musician from Ecuador.
Right.
What do you do? No Beethoven? Right. No Tchaikovsky? Anyway, I'm getting too polemical about that. But
not at all.
Well, no, but that, I mean, that is, I'm certainly as an artist, and what I try to bring to the Quad City Symphony everywhere you conduct. It's like, look, we're playing Dvorak New World Symphony like Czechs, and we're going to play Barber like Americans, and we play Brahms like Germans, and that's the beauty of it. And that's the beauty, in a way, of being American as opposed to being German, or, you know, like, or French or whatever. Like you're not. We have to be eclectic and know all these styles because we came to the game so late, you know. And so, like, for the Berlin Philharmonic to play French music, although they do really well, you know, it's like a big departure. Or if you look, the Berlin Philharmonic never plays Copland. Like, you know, why is that? You know. So anyway, there are all sorts of intrigues like that, but it kind of frees us up as Americans who have to be jacks of all trades and understand the styles. And that's something that I try to impart into our musicians, is that, you know, we embrace and we can be Spanish, we can be whatever we need to be for that moment, for that piece.
Bravo. I think you've just said what I've said in many interviews in a different way. We Americans are certainly culturally cousins of Europe, basically, although that's changing as the world keeps morphing. But, certainly the vast majority of Americans in 1950 had some sort of European antecedent. And we as musicians profited from the catastrophes in Europe during World War II and in the Soviet Union. So we got incredible amounts of great musician teachers from those places who fled either because of racial persecution or just artistic and personal persecution, or because things were so bad and no place to live. So, we benefited immensely from that. And we were also, since we came late to the game, we weren't so overwhelmed with the national culture as Germans are, as French are, Italians, Czechs, Spaniards. I mean, their feet are planted so deep in that earth that they have trouble getting away from it. Now, the whole world is moving on. It's true that the Berlin Philharmonic does now play French music extremely well. But there was a time when the Vienna Philharmonic, one of the greatest in the world, could not play the Rite of Spring in 1954 and abandoned it. And instead they played Einhelden Laban by Strauss, which is one of the most difficult virtuoso pieces ever written. But for them, that's mother's milk, They just couldn't count Stravinsky. Back to counting, the finale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, bum, ba, 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 bum, ba, 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 bum, ba, 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 ba. That stuff. That's sort of, that's like West Side Story plus, right?
Right.
And it's in 5. Now, for those of you who are musicians, this is too obvious, but 5 is not an even number. 2 and 4 are square. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. They're a little bit marchy. 3 is round. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 5 is really, what is it? Is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4? That's harder to feel. So very often we as musicians have to feel that it's either 2 plus 3 or 3 plus 2. Bum, bop, 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 or bop, 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 bop. Anyway, it's that kind of stuff. End of a rhythmic division lesson. But this piece is in 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the tune is 2 and 3. Da ba 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 bum ba 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 bum ba 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 bum ba ba bum. And the horrible thing is that musicians will often feel it when they don't know it. They'll feel the first 2 beats as 3. Da ba 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 ba. But it doesn't go that way. Ba 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 ba. That's part of the edginess of it. And that kind of rhythmic play has been going on in music. I mean, everything good in America. That's 6/8 and 3/4 alternating bars. Da 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 bum bum bum, which is very Hispanic in our understanding. But Bach and Handel knew about it very, very well. They just didn't emphasize it so much. Everybody's known about this stuff, but it's more characteristic of certain musics. And so, so just like everything good in America, this is taking it to a much unfriendlier place and a much more panic-ridden place. And actually, orchestras and often your colleagues get a little very nervous about it because you're on edge all the time. You could just never sit back and know where the beat is. You have to really
because there's this already, exactly like you said, it can really settle into 6/8 very easily. But then there's just the distance and the acoustic. I mean, there are all sorts of other factors. When the trombones play it, they're about as far away from you and me as we can get, and so that creates a whole other thing,
And they can't hear me either.
Right, exactly.
I just have to look at you and listen to them, and
And I just kind of close my eyes and rely on them, to be honest.
Well, as I said, this is my. I don't give conducting lessons, but I know some pieces very well. And if a conductor is doing this piece for the first time, which you're not, I always say, just tell the orchestra it's the timpanist. They go bum 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 right on the beat. And timpani players usually have good rhythm because that's, after all, what you hire them for. That's what,
limited notes, but good rhythm. I mean, that's
the principal
theory.
job. Actually, timpani tone is also very important, but that's more subtle. So it's not as scary as it seems at first. It reminds me of a great quote from the legendary German conductor Walter Klemperer. What was Klemperer's first name?
Werner.
No,
that's his son.
Oh, that's right. That's his son. No, the senior one actually came here to the
Otto Klemperer. Anyway, who had a sarcastic, ironic sense of humor. And when somebody complained to him about one of his tempos, he said, "Don't worry, you'll get used to it." So actually, in this 5/8, the orchestra will get used to it.
Right.
Actually,
Exactly.
fairly fast, because
Right.
it's not nearly as challenging as it was 60 years ago.
Oh.
So,
Well, I have to say my intent, Garrick Ohlsson, was to let you speed you on your way, but it's your own fault for being so engaging that we have thoroughly enjoyed our time with you. But it is the case that we've got a couple of other items on the program to discuss with Maestro Smith. But for now, let me
But
just,
wait, you know,
yes,
Kai,
please.
Kai, we should also say, I mean, Garrick has been, you know, in the Quad Cities. I don't know if you have kept count how many times you performed with the Quad Cities, but I mean,
quite a number, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's, you know, and the Brahms we did together just a few years ago was, for me, so memorable, and the encore of Claire de Lune. I mean, so you just have. I'm so happy to invite you back.
Oh,
because you know, I mean, you're beloved here. I mean, you're one of my favorite musicians in the world. I've heard you in Minnesota a lot, where I live. You know, you played with the Minnesota Orchestra often, and so. But I think, like I said, it's so great for us to be able to introduce our audience to this piece again. You know, because it's one of those. And so you're the perfect messenger. You know, in my opinion. So I'm just so happy that.
Well, I'm extremely happy too, because from the first time I came to the Quad City Symphony in February of 1978, who keeps track, I recognized that this was a regional orchestra of extraordinary quality and extraordinary fine qualities. And obviously that came from the presence of its music director and its history, as these things don't just happen overnight. And in other words, here I found an orchestra that was playing at a level much higher than one might reasonably anticipate. And it's always been a pleasure to return. And I always say that when I'm there. Of course, it sounds like I'm just being flattering to the orchestra I'm playing with this week, but that's not the case. It's a compliment, but it's not just a compliment. It's a true fact, as they say. And I actually tell people all over the place about the Quad City Symphony, because it's remarkable.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for your time. We're so grateful, and we can't wait to see you in person, sir. Thank you.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. It's just 2 months away, isn't it?
Yeah,
very close.
Not far.
Very close.
That's very soon. So, see you soon.
Okay, all the best. Great to see you.
I have one professional question. You can cut this part out. You know that business, that funny tootie in the finale, I forget what number it is.
Just rebar it? I think I did in Springfield, actually. I actually don't remember.
I find, after having played the piece a lot, it usually goes much better if you can do that.
If you do rebar it, right?
Yeah. And Slatkin, who's conducted it at least 100 times with John Browning and several times with me, said, "I finally got over my pride." He said, it saves 5 minutes of rehearsal, and it never sounds as good, because you got the horns going in quarters, bomb, 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 bomb.
No, that's what the music is. I mean, there's a place in Petrushka exactly like that, and it's 5/8, and we do it in 5/4, and it sounds like the music. No, well, I should do it.
Some friends of mine played the Copland-Vitebsk trio for him, and they asked him why he barred it in this meter instead of the other possible meter, because there are two at once, you know? And he said, "Oh, don't think I didn't try." He said, "Have you tried rebarring it the other way?" He said, "It's just as bad. It makes it just as impossible." He said, there are two rhythms happening, and there's just no one rhythm that will solve that. So that's the perfect example of that. Look, we have the same problem in Brahms too sometimes.
Well, exactly.
Well, I will absolutely insist that stays in, because that was brilliant to watch. So
that's shop talk. Okay, well, I don't mean to be giving.
Well, I mean, but now the librarian has. I wonder what's in the part. I mean, I was just talking to the librarian. The parts come in a week, and so it depends on what's. Well, he'll have to change the parts, because
it's only about 8 bars or 16 bars. Very short. And as I said about Tiffany, that's what librarians are for too.
Well, exactly.
Okay. Thank you so very much. Okay. We'll see you soon.
Okay, all the best. I'm looking forward.
Thanks. See
you as well.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Oh, that was such a delight, Maestro. And I think it's got to stay in there. Absolutely. That will be my vote, because it's a great deal of fun to watch two wonderful geniuses communicating. But we've got some other geniuses to talk about.
We do.
First, our opening work, Dudley Buck's Festival Overture on the American National Air. I've never even heard of this. Help me out.
Well, I don't want to give away too much, but our tradition is singing the national anthem, before a concert. And so let's just say this piece helps us honor that tradition somehow in unexpected ways. Dudley Buck is an American composer of a certain time and a certain ilk that will sound very Gilbert and Sullivan-like, actually. And it's I think it's just a perfect way to open a season, and our audience will understand when they hear it. But I don't want to be too I don't want to give away too much.
That's fine. That's fine. Just wanted to make mention of it. And then now I can tell you why I'm sitting here in Stone City, Iowa, or at least
Right.
Grant Wood's interpretation of Stone City, Iowa. That's because after the Barber Piano Concerto, which we're very excited about, we get to once again, and you said earlier, get the symphony to play like Czechs. I think they're playing like Czechs who've been to Iowa, which is very important.
Right.
And here, Dvorak Symphony No. 9 from the New World. I think a lot of this music will sound familiar to many in the audience, but there is something about it that I think is a kind of almost a joke on its title, being from the new. Is every time I hear this, I seem to hear it a different way, and I don't know what phenomenon that causes that.
Well, if it weren't called From the New World and somebody just played it, it would probably sound like another great Czech symphony by the great Czech composer. There are, of course, dramatic American elements, Native American music, spirituals, and so and of course he wrote it here, and the backstory and the Dvorak history and Dvorak's assistance with American music and to American musicians of all races, all creeds, all genders. He was for American music and really wanted to show kind of uptight, insecure, culturally insecure composers saying, we have an American school here and you should embrace it. And you have so much material with which to work here that I'm going to give you an example of how that can be done. And so, yeah, it's a beloved work. It's everything that's Dvorak, the Czech dances, the big sweeping lines, the intimate lyricism, the color. He's a beloved composer for a reason. And the idea of the post-COVID New World, or we hope, or that certainly came into the thinking about having it here for opening night of what we were hoping and praying is the post-COVID season, where we have a big orchestra on stage and a big audience in the hall, God willing. That certainly played a role as well. And the idea of the Barber, well, first of all, Dudley Buck, an unknown American composer. The Barber, like a kind of underrepresented, but like the great American piano concerto, as Garrick Ohlsson said, and I totally agree. And the coupling it with, a great American work by a great, one of the most famous and venerated of European composers. I like the mix. I like the mix, and it's familiar enough. The Barber's not familiar at all, but people are going to jump on their feet because it's thrilling and it's virtuosic and it's American, and they're going to jump on their feet for the New World Symphony because it's beloved and because their orchestra plays fantastically, and that we're back. And so the mix of familiar and unfamiliar and American and European, it's all part of my thinking with kind of concocting this program.
Well, I'm afraid I'm probably going to get in trouble with the powers that be because we've gone long, but I hope, I know no one will complain because it's been such an engaging conversation. And I owe you great thanks for that, and also our guest, Garrick Ohlsson. We look forward to seeing you back in the hall. There is an exuberance to coming back together again, and I'm grateful for you taking some time to talk with us in advance. And I'm grateful to Chris Connolly and Wells Fargo Advisors for supporting this series and making all that magic happen. But for now, friends, buckle up. It's going to be a great season with your Quad City Symphony Orchestra. Maestro, thank you.
Thank you, Kai. Great to see you.